it's complicated. It was a complicated story. There was one man who alleged he had been sexually approached by two different Reagan aides. There was a separate encounter involving a congressman named Bob Livingston, where he had a drunken dinner with a Republican lobbyist who made a move on him. And all these sorts of events led this group of Republican congressmen to try to basically torpedo Ronald Reagan's nomination because they didn't like him. They wanted George H.W. Bush.
I feel like there are many parts of The Secret City that could be turned into a movie or a series. There a lot of, like, one of the things that could definitely be a some sort of like Netflix miniseries is the whole outing of Reagan. Like that whole thing.
The attempt to out. He was not gay, Ronald Reagan.
Yeah.
There was an attempt to maybe claim that he was.
The attempt to out Reagan. Can you tell the story of that whole alleged Reagan homosexual cabal, like that whole situation?
Yeah, so when Reagan was governor early in his term of California, there was actually a small gay, well, not small, there was a gay scandal where he was accused of having a number of gay staffers who had participated supposedly in an orgy at a timeshare house in Lake Tahoe. And one of the men accused of doing this, not by name, it was sort of inferred in a newspaper column, was Jack Kemp, who at the time was a football player, a professional football player, who would later become a congressman and then ran for vice president with Robert Dole in 1996. And this was, so there was this alleged homosexual ring in the governor's office in 1967, and Reagan fired two men who had been supposedly a part of this ring. And it would come back to bite him in the summer of 1980 when he was about to be nominated by the Republican Party to be the presidential candidate. And there was a group of moderate and liberal Republican congressmen who put together a dossier in which a number of men alleged that they had been sort of sexually approached by, actually it was one man. Well, there was it's complicated. It was a complicated story. There was one man who alleged he had been sexually approached by two different Reagan aides. There was a separate encounter involving a congressman named Bob Livingston, where he had what he believed was a sort of he had a drunken dinner with a Republican lobbyist who made a move on him. And all these sorts of events led this group of Republican congressmen to try to basically torpedo Ronald Reagan's nomination because they didn't like him. They wanted George H.W. Bush, or a more moderate nominee. They wanted a more moderate nominee, and they presented this dossier to Ben Bradlee, who investigated it. Ben Bradlee, the legendary executive editor of the Washington Post, who published the Watergate stories of Woodward and Bernstein, and he assigned Bob Woodward to look into this, along with a number of other reporters, and they did look into it, and they ended up interviewing a number of people, and they did discover that there were some gay men who worked for Ronald Reagan, but they could not piece together any sort of kind of conspiracy as these congressmen were alleging, and the Post never published anything about this, and And so I uncovered this in Ben Bradlee's papers. His papers are at the University of Texas, and there was a folder in containing all the notes of this investigation and transcripts of interviews and this dossier that they compiled and gave to Ben Bradlee. It was all sitting there, and I pieced together the story, and yeah, it was probably the biggest revelation in my book, just in terms of kind of the news value of it, and yeah, I think it would make a great series, and from your mouth to the studio executives' ears. They're not really listening to us right now, unfortunately, because
not that we know of. Ted Sarandos is a huge fan of the AUXORO podcast.
Well, I didn't mean that. I just meant in the sense that we're not allowed to talk to them as writers right now. There's a strike going on, so
yeah.
And there's just what's going on in Hollywood right now is a whole nother conversation. But yeah, I'd love to see it on the screen.